You're muted, brother. You're muted.
Hey friends, it's your favorite Kevin for episode 7 of Goats and Cookies. This episode is titled Power, Money, and Ignorance. Pretty heavy topics. Joining me today is my co-host Zach and my co-host Lou and our special guest Jesse Barnes. He is a Marine vet, public affairsman, tradesman, mechanic, activist, and farmer. He's a jack of all trades from what I can tell, and I'm really looking forward to our interview today. We're gonna go ahead and start the episode out with our book of the week, and I'm gonna hand it over to Zach.
All right, guys. So I'm gonna hit us with two books of the week this week. Had a really hard time narrowing it down just because I'm a book nerd and I love it. But I'm gonna change things up for our start. I'm gonna hit us up with a historical fiction novel, written by a well-known name that many of you that are here and our viewers might recognize, Dell Dye. Dell Dye was a combat correspondent in Vietnam in 1967 and in 1968, and so Dale ended up writing this novel when he came home in college, and he never published it. He sat on it for about 25 or 30 years. And the novel, Run Between the Raindrops, is about his experience in Way City, but it's novelized. It was actually recommended to me by Bernie Bernstein that Kevin and Lou met during the birthday message. And this is a special one, and Bernie inscribed it for me. He sent it to me, so it's really cool and I'm partial to it. But it's a fantastic read to kind of put people in the shoes of a grunt's perspective, combat correspondent's perspective in Way City in 1968, and what they were going through with those Marines that had little to no urban training at the time period, having to figure things out on their own. The second book of the week we have is a Navy book that I've totally loved. Read it when it first came out, rereading it again. But it is about VF-18 in World War II. In 2 months of combat, they earned a nickname Two a Day 18, where they were shooting down a little over two Japanese planes a day in that Pacific fighting in 1944, going up against kamikaze attacks, flying some of the first combat missions over Japan as carrier strike fighters. And it's a fantastic dive into just Navy fighter pilots' experience and the struggles that they faced even against the overwhelming success they were having flying those missions in 1944.
I mean, that's pretty hardcore, I
Dude,
guess. Some
smidge.
legend badasses right there. Do you mind holding them up for one
Yeah,
more
bro.
time so we can see the covers?
Bam.
Fuck yes, there you go, people. Read that shit. That's some badass stuff. All right, so thank you very much, Zach. We're going to hop right in on the questions. The first question is for you, Jesse. From your perspective as a tradesman and an activist, what do you think people misunderstand most about how working class Americans learn about politics and power?
Uh, I mean, from my personal experience, I think that a lot of people um, think that most of like working class folks get their information from the corporate conglomerates, and it, that we're kind of seeing this a little bit in our experience in America today, that they're they're just not educated on civics, and to a
Hmm.
degree that is um, it's true. But I mean, I remember I graduated in 2003. Like, we went through civics class and we got an understanding of what the foundation of this country was like built on, and our governmental system, and how it operates. Uh, I think that for the most part, they just kind of discount the working class, to where we're not educated enough to understand the ins and outs and the throes of all the happenings in Washington between politicians and lobbyists, and the executive and judicial branches. Um, Not all um, completely accurate, particularly in my opinion for this latest generation that's coming about. And I've spent some time over the last year in college with some guys in their early and mid 20 somethings, that they didn't have civic classes, but they damn well have a grasp on what's going on. because they see how it affects them. It's their lived reality.
Absolutely. Great answer. Do you guys have anything to add to that, Zach, Lou?
Yeah, just kind of chiming in with what Jesse's saying there. It's like, um, I think just in general, especially when the further north you get, I guess north of Richmond here, um, people still kind of look down on the South in general of like that Southern people are miseducated, uneducated, but you'll find that it's kind of the exact opposite, especially as Jesse was talking about with this newer generation. They're very aware of what is going on in their politics. The problem comes, of course, like and this isn't just sort of a Southern problem. It's a middle class and working class issue where we don't when you only have access to a certain type of information coming from one source, and you may think that you're watching. There's that famous clip where uh, all these different local stations are all reading basically the exact same um, pitch and release about something. I can't remember what was going on, but like literally word for word, verbatim type stuff. And these are all different, all around the country, different organizations, and it just shows that the funnel, right? Like it's all coming from one place,
Mm.
um, and you know, I think yeah. I think there's always going to be there's sort of misconceptions about uh, working class people that, we're dumb, that we don't know what's going on. And you know what? I think sometimes that could probably play to our advantage with some of these dumbass politicians that think they're smarter than we are, because they're not.
Mm.
And, you know, that's that's kind of where I'll leave my portion at.
Well, just touching on what you just the last part of what you were saying, we work it to our advantage. I definitely do. So, for the most part, my accent, my little South Carolina accent's gone. But when I'm working for a customer, especially an extremely wealthy customer here in California, you best believe I'm talking like I'm from the South again. Because oh my God, they will believe that the sky's purple. If I say it in that accent, they will believe everything I fucking say. So, it is, there are a lot of misconceptions as to how we are educated, how we bent the system to our will. I completely agree with you. Zach, you have anything?
Absolutely. Thinking about the as an educator, man, for 9 years I have taught civics classes of some capacity, whether they be standard civics classes for kids who perhaps weren't motivated to be in honors classes, to kids that just struggled learning in advanced classes but could just handle basics. To collegiate level classes that really break apart the government. And one of the things that I was able to pick up on, even reflecting on myself as a teenager to now, when it just comes to misinformation, is how easy people are able to buy to it now. Um,
Mm.
I always tell my students that in theory, we are in the best age of technology where we should be the most educated because, we have this little thing right here that in theory, we should be able to research anything that we see, dive into it, and find the correct answers. However, when you think about the flooding of misinformation that will often come into play to a lot of it's going back to the corporate conglomerate that Jesse spoke on earlier. How do you know what's misinformation, especially in a world now where AI is such a factor? How do you know which articles if you don't know necessarily how to look for bias, if you haven't been taught for that? How do you know what is right and what isn't? I think about when I was in high school and I remember my civics class, I wasn't taught about media bias and how to pick apart bias within articles. That's something I learned much later going through college and undergrad. Now I've tried to teach that to my students, and they're mind blown once you start teaching them, where to find buzzwords, how to find certain phrasings. And they're like, oh, wow, this is an incredibly biased article that, 3 months ago I'd have just accepted that, oh, this is just the garnish of the truth. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. And part of that goes into education. However, that's for kids that are willing to learn. I think about my time as an educator, And I'd say it's 50-50. Half the kids I've taught in government classes really bought into it, wanted to learn more, wanted to learn how to better themselves to better this country. And the other half at the time frame of teenagers didn't give a damn. And so, from what I see, I hope that those kids who don't give a damn learn to give a damn as adults. But, when I think about that as an educator, a lot of these kids who don't care now never will care. And when they do care, they only care about the politics or the views that they were raised in. They never bothered to educate themselves to look at other perspectives. They just take things for face value and run with it. Now, while Kevin's coughing, I'll pull this up for folks. For people out there that are ever interested in researching biases, where to find articles, and how things can kind of get pushed around. I teach this to my kids. But this is a website called Ground News, and
Mm.
you can find all sorts of articles, and it will give you coverage of various sources of where they will lie from the conservative standpoint, from a leftist standpoint to a moderate standpoint, and give an idea of where people generally feel about it and how. And it's updated daily. There's another one that goes out there as well. I think it's called allsides.com, and it'll show you where articles lean in terms of their bias. And it will often, you can put any article up there and find it, but it's a great place to start trying to pick apart how to educate yourself in our ever-changing world of politics.
Excellent. And Ground News is actually a pretty famous YouTube financier, I guess, for different channels. They sponsor a lot of different channels. So we are not sponsored by Ground News, but Ground News, come
Poor
on
old
over,
man.
come give us some of that Ground News money. All right, so Zach, the next question is for you. When you look at American history, do you see moments where money had a louder voice than the actual people did? And how does that compare to what we're seeing now?
Man, that's a great question. And I think, when you look at the founding of this country and you go into the Constitution, you absolutely find that 100%. Um, I mean, look at how the Constitution is written and who it's written by. It's written by property owning males. It's not written by anyone else who is of the opposite gender, let alone of other races, or even for men who just didn't own land. It's all literally written by what you can consider the elite of the 1780s. You've got the placing of the Electoral College. You could argue that that is a time where money talks louder than democracy of the people. But for me, I think the most shining light of history in our country is the Gilded Age, 1000%. It's that late 1800s period where you've got money that is the dominating factor. You've got industries popping up all over the country, railroads, steel industries, where their money who they are supporting as those big business tycoons is influencing our elections. Who is winning at the state and the local levels? Who is currently running and changing policies on how the steel, coal, and rail industries are working in that time period? And sadly, at least in this historian's take, this reflects exactly to what we're looking at today, in my opinion. The Gilded Age focused on an extreme wealth inequality, where you had the elite that were having huge impacts with what they could do with the lobbying, who they were buying. We're seeing that now, once again, where you have huge inequality. I mean, how many billionaires live in the United States? And what impact are they having on our elections? Look at the lobbying that's taking place in Washington, D.C. How many politicians are in D.C. That aren't bought by corporate, that aren't bought by lobbyists, that aren't bought by these millionaires? And I think that unfortunately, this is a trend that we're not gonna. I know this is my pessimistic side, and I hope you guys are optimistic. Please, please come at me with your optimism. But for my pessimistic side, I don't see us bringing great change, because how do you fight against billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that the mass public does not have?
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading a couple days ago. I know my numbers are going to be like highly skewed, but there are 4,000 people who have, I think it was like umpty trillion dollars, whereas the lower 50% of the Earth's population doesn't even have that much wealth. 4,000 people have more than the lower 50%. It's just absolutely bonkers how we've gotten to this point, and it's just getting worse. It's not getting better. It's not like we've plateaued. We're definitely sinking further. Jesse, Lou, do you guys have anything to add to this?
Uh, well, I'll say I mean, from my personal opinion, and just being a history buff, and uh, this kind of leads into me being a car buff as well. Like money has always had a louder voice than the people. Money buys influence, government seats, funds propaganda campaigns. Look at Henry Ford, okay? This man literally had a hemp farm on his personal property in Michigan, and he developed an ethanol, methanol gas to run his Ford vehicles on, derived from the plant. Ford also experimented with and developed hemp plastics in the 40s. He showcased a prototype in 1941 where a Ford car was derived from hemp and other sustainable resources. These two elements were uh, of this agricultural industry. It were a direct threat to investors like J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, who lobbied and won congressional influence and ran a propaganda campaign to quash that potential competitive crop. Um, income reefer madness. Uh, they were still growing, hemp in the 40s until the Korean War, but mainly for the war effort and special licenses. That's why Henry Ford was still able to grow after 1937. But if they can kill the dreams of a man like Henry Ford, what are the chances, do you think, an average American stood against these lobbies? The demonization of competitive crops like hemp directly benefited the monopolies on timber, petroleum, pharmaceutical companies, and side note, Standard Oil Company, John D. Rockefeller's company, collaborated with DuPont to develop new technologies, refining oil and producing chemicals. In addition, DuPont supplied gunpowder to Rockefeller's railroad operations. And what do railroads need? Railroads need steel, timber, coal, and petroleum to operate. Hemp was a direct financial threat to all of those industries which Rockefeller was directly invested. And I don't think what happened back then is any different than what's happening now.
Absolutely. They have great references there too. I mean, that's a perfect comparison. Absolutely.
Outstanding. It's nice to have another like history nerd here, dude. This is great. But to echo off that, then I'll turn it over to Lou and Kevin because I know you guys are definitely going to chime in on this. It's like I think about that statement there when you think about J.P. Morgan or Rockefeller being impacted. How can a guy like me, who is passionate about what I believe and the change that I want to believe, and I know that my vote matters in my heart, but how can I compete against a guy like Jeff Bezos who has an untapped, literally billions of dollars, and I have minuscule donations I can throw at politicians. Go ahead, Lou. Bring it in.
I was going to say trillion.
Oh, excuse me, trillion. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah. But it's just I think about that, and I'm not saying that to scare people from voting. I'm not. I'm not. We can bring change if you have faith in our elections. It's just the odds and obstacles that are stacked on us are so high. We really have to come together as people and see this for what it is instead of buying into what we just see on mainstream media. We really have to unite and come together. And a lot of politics is divisive now. It is polarization. It is either you versus me. My side is correct, yours is not. Instead of let's actually look at the root of the problem of who is causing our issues.
Venezuela.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Lee.
I'm gonna also say too, like, I mean, I love the idea, right, of the American dream, and that we all have an opportunity, right, to, start up our own business and all that, and a lot of people do. I mean, I know Jesse's got his farm and is doing everything with culinary and stuff like that, and um, you know, Kev, you've run your own company before. Um, you know, I don't want to ever like discount that, but when they sell us this dream that we could compete with, say, an Amazon, or like say you're having like you've got your own public relations company and you want to you want to try to compete with some of these giant, you know, communication conglomerates. They know there's no way in hell, right? The barriers to entry are just too much. And they establish that, right? They create that, right? I don't want to like shit on too many companies, but we're talking about like here in Virginia, in my area, right? There's Verizon and there's Comcast, and that's it. That's what you got as
Mm.
far as internet providers. Anything outside of that, you're either getting like really shitty quality or or you've got to pay an arm and a leg just to get it. Or it's free from your apartment complex because they have a deal with whatever little small company. But you've got those companies right there. Like, what if I wanted to start up my own, fiber optic internet company? If I had the like wherewithal and could I compete with Verizon or Comcast? Hell no, right? It's a straight they've got it on lock, and same thing with Amazon, and they'll always try to push this idea of like, oh well, we started from the ground up, we were just an online book company and all that, and that's all good and well, and that's very true, but what happens once you reach a point where you have completely uh, put the market in a stranglehold, right?
Yeah.
Who's getting in on any of that, right?
Yeah.
So
You just need a small loan of $50 million from your parents, and you can just start your own fiber.
Mm.
correct.
Right.
And your bootstraps, I guess, are not
Yeah.
strapping.
Yeah, definitely. And just staying on you, Lou, this next question is for you. From your communication standpoint, how much of our political messaging today is shaped by who can afford the biggest megaphone without that $50 million small loan?
I mean, look at who wins elections, right? It's
Yeah.
typically the candidate that has the most money, right? The most resources, the most opportunities to get out in front of people. How do you get out in front of people? YouTube ads, targeted marketing ads. It's probably it's gone away a little bit from commercial ads, but as far as like traditional TV goes, right? But they're still using those, and I mean, you got to think for some little candidate who's just starting up and grassroots and trying to get it going, it's got to be like trying to pay for a Super Bowl ad, you know? It might as well be, $10 million for a 30-second ad when you don't have all these uh, billionaires and millionaires just funneling money to you to get your shit out there and get your message out there. And it's unfortunate. I think you know the smarter campaigns. I think now that you, I think we're going to start seeing more as the shift of um, where the average American consumes their media. Uh, the people that tap into that quicker, faster, and more effectively and more efficiently are going to be able to maybe even bypass some of these politicians that are spending millions of dollars on commercials, right? Like if you can get a good TikTok following going, you get some influencers out there pushing for you. I mean, that may be that not maybe that is the wave of the future, right? It's very um, meeting your audience where they're at. And I think the candidates that are ahead of that game are going to one save a lot of money, two save a lot of time, and three again possibly bypass and might start seeing a little bit more upsets in the political realm when it comes to communication and ads.
So you can see a ticket one day where running for president and vice would be like I Show Speed and Mr. Beast.
Dude, I'm already on I Show Speed, Mr. Beast ticket, dude.
That's a great answer, man. I really appreciate that insight. You guys
Yeah.
have anything to add to that?
I'll chime in for a second here because I
Hmm.
100% could see that. My students joke and they're like, "Ha, it's Mr. Beast," because they claim that I look like Mr. Beast. And so the uh
Yeah.
the amount of these kids, like, and I think of that from the youth perspective. A kid might not care about Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, they might not care about Donald Trump, perhaps, just because they might not have that connection. They're older. We're talking about people in their 70s and their 80s. However, you put an influencer that makes the ticket and checks off all the boxes and makes a joke, haha, I'm running for president. And you think about youth, and we think about, 18-year-old kids who are going to be voting, kids in college that are influenced by TikTok, YouTube, Instagram Reels that realistically could be a game changer when you think about it. And you think about a politician that's perhaps able to get backed by some of those bigger influencers or even the influencers themselves Maybe it's the youth that bring the change that we don't see coming. Maybe that is our hope that we have in anywhere from 4 to 8 years from now, and blindsides us as a nation and flips everything that we've never seen before.
I mean, when you think about what social media can do as far as influence goes, I mean, look back to the GameStop, uh, the running up of the GameStop stuff. What was that? That was off like Reddit, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
it was all Reddit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Dumb Money, I think, is the movie that depicts that. But yeah, I mean, that just shows you. I mean, you can make millions off of social media, and uh, to that same effect, you can utilize it to gain your influence and gain elections without spending a ton of money.
I've got
So,
I've got two words, Citizens United. That 2010 decision to allow damn near unlimited political funding,
Yeah.
it just pretty much put the average American, if they even had a chance, they don't have the financial means to combat a corporate megaphone like that. On the other hand, we are seeing traction kind of across the country, but if you look at grassroots efforts like the Mamdani campaign, it's an example of where opposition's actions are definitely contradicted by their message, and why Mr. Mamdani was able to get a foothold in a city like New York, largely where corporations win the day. The citizens of New York City have a lived experience of these aforementioned contradictions and ignored the propaganda campaigns to silence political dissidents interfering with their profit margins. Outside of this example, I do see it's very difficult to get ahead of the messaging, of corporate interest, uh, because the largest news and social media outlets have such a tightly controlled algorithm. It's rarely overtaken by viral truths and empirical evidence. But I mean, like Lou was saying earlier, like the wave of the future of how media is being consumed is going to change, and I think with that, it's going to turn the tide.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answers from all of you. I really appreciate that. All right, moving on to the next question. This one's for you, Jesse. Working with people within the trades, how often did you see political decisions affect people's lives long before those people even heard about those changes in the news?
Well, one of the prime examples I'm seeing, um, is the tariffs. Like it's a tax on the back end, and so people are ordering less, or companies just start shipping, they're getting less orders, and that means there's less products coming to the port, there's less workers needed at the port, there's less trucks being loaded, which means there's less trucks on the road, which means diesel's not getting sold at gas stations all across the nation. So it's a trickle down effect. And, particularly, I remember I worked on one motorcycle for a friend of mine, this 2002 ZZR 1200, which is an incredible motorcycle, but I had to order some parts from Japan. It took damn near 2 months to get 16 screws. So like that affects people's livelihood, and their rhythm, their well, just their life overall. Because if the parts aren't there, that means the work's not there, and then if the work's not there, no longer is your job. I live in a state where it's a right to work state, so they can let you go for any reason whatsoever outside of protected like veteran status or something like that. So like I've seen a huge impact on the working class in my region just alone, and I can only imagine how the rest of the nation is feeling the crunch over such asinine decisions that our government has made over the past 10 months, 12 months.
Hmm. Why didn't you just buy those screws American though? I mean, little sarcasm to throw in there.
If American manufacturing wasn't moved overseas, they might be available. But
Yeah.
like they exploit cheap labor, and the American manufacturer gets closed down, and you just have to figure out how to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But you have to have bootstraps to begin with to do that.
Yeah, we're all in flip-flops these days. So yeah, absolutely. You guys have anything to add to this? All
yeah,
right.
I mean, Jesse nailed it
Yeah, he
dead
absolutely
on.
did. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jesse, for that. This next question is for you, Lou. I'm sorry. This next question is for Zach. My bad, I didn't mean to skip you there. So has there ever been a period where widespread lack of education posed a serious danger to democracy, similar to what people were talking about is happening today?
Never. We would never ever do that in this great nation that we have created. Yeah, man, without a doubt. And one of the earliest things that comes up to me, I won't say earliest, but one I guess more prominent, is I think of the 19 teens and 20s and the 50s with the Red Scare, this fear of communism, and generally speaking, this widespread lack of education and understanding of just political beliefs, of course, and you factor in government misinformation and government controlled information, 100% pose a danger to our democracy. I mean, how many people in this time frame lost basic civil liberties and rights simply because they were accused of being a communist during this fear of what was sweeping across Europe? Um, then follow that up with the 50s and the 60s of civil rights. How many people, as the civil rights movement is trying to bring rights to Americans, um, almost have their rights and liberties infringed on simply because of a lack of a basic education. Um, and I think that, to an extent, we are approaching an era where we see once again a lack of education. Again, not for any part of the teacher's fault. And I'm not saying that for me. I always tell my students I'm a terrible teacher. They don't say that, but I hate talking about myself. I think that I'm mediocre. My fiance, a brilliant educator. But when it comes to when we think about education, education is one of the cornerstones that gives us democracy. Education allows you to explore the realm of free thought. It allows you to open up your mindset as a learner to the wide world around you. And I think about the high school kids I've worked with over the last 9 years. And a lot of the time, I am the first, or sometimes perhaps the last, serious political conversation any of them have ever had, where they've been challenged to actually openly understand what they think and why. And you think about, well, why is that a threat? It's not me, it's not the system that perhaps was initially thought of. It's where we are now. Education's underfunded. North Carolina just got a F grade as the lowest underfunded state in all of the states. We are 50th. Make that make sense. And then our state wonders why we don't have good education. Um, we see education is being politicized now. Teachers all across the United States are being accused of teaching a narrative when they're not, simply because someone does not agree with them. Look at a paper that was just turned in at a university that
Hmm.
literally, prime example, where people are being removed from a position simply because the facts don't fit a narrative that somebody wants them to fit. Um, and due to that, our democracy is becoming very fragile when it comes to that concept of education. You would think in a society like the United States, we would want the most educated teenagers we are putting out there with the most informed information to make the best decisions. But what political party or what politicians really want that? Why have people fully educated to understand how to take a deep dive into their background, into their policies, into what they stand for, when you can push mediocre education where you have mediocre people? Not that they are, but their education is, if they don't further it, perhaps, and they go out there and they make ill-informed decisions. That's what the corporate wants. That's what the elite wants. People who don't question things, people who do not educate themselves. And I believe that we are there again. When you bring in how much money is running around the United States in political campaigns, in our political elections, where you have FEC that was brought up. I fucking hate that court case with a passion. I wish that it would have went up in a smoke ball in a huge thing of flames. It's absolutely disgusting to analyze almost how much unlimited money can be put to elections. And that goes back to the point earlier. What candidate wins the election? It's not the best one in general. It realistically, oftentimes, it's who has the most money to put forward to a campaign, to put information out there to swing the way of the people. And that's where, sadly, we lose our education. As people see a political ad, they see this person talking about X, Y, and Z, and they never bother to question it. They're like, that person said what I like to hear. I wanted to hear that. That works for me. People don't take a deep dive to look into it. Why take a deep dive and spend 20, 30 minutes or an hour researching when you can watch a 60-second commercial that tells you all you need to hear or all you want to hear?
Well, they all do their own research on Facebook. I mean,
Oh,
I hate to admit this, my entire family, out east is they are convinced that they are right in everything to the point where they're bragging about defunding cancer research when, the person in particular, my cousin that I'm talking about, his father survived prostate cancer, his sister survived breast cancer, and he's like, well, good, I don't feel like paying for cancer research. And it's like, well, as someone whose father died from cancer, I disagree, But I mean, absolutely, it's crazy that my brother is fully behind. He is, as I don't want to say he's an anti-intellectual because he is by definition, but he isn't in that in his own motivations. He homeschools his children. Well, I should say his wife homeschools their children. She barely graduated high school. You don't need to be qualified to homeschool in South Carolina. And it's because they're comparing the homeschool quality to the school quality. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, if you keep voting to take all of the money out of schools, no shit, it's going to be trash. I mean, what do you expect? And they're going to be more politicized by taking the funding out because the radicals who truly believe in what they're doing are the only ones who are going to stay long enough to I mean, kind of stand out. It's really a fucking sad situation.
It
Um, um
is,
yeah.
man. To think about how much education has become politicized. I can think about conversations that we've had in North Carolina for the past few years about just what we could like technically approach in our classrooms and how to approach it. I've never adhered to any of that. Um, I teach my content that I'm supposed to teach without a doubt, and I show a multitude of perspectives because that's what you do when you're teaching a class on politics. You give people really harsh topics that make them very uncomfortable, and you open their minds. You allow them to make their own decisions, and you provide that information. That's what a good educator does. You do the same thing for history. If I'm talking about the Gilded Age, you give a multitude of primary sources for people to read from and make their own informed decision on what was happening in the time period. And you push them in the best direction you see fit. But at the end of the day, when I would do debates in my class, I was never afraid to tell my students. I was like, all right, here's our topic on abortion. Tell me where you stand on it. Explain to me why. All right, now we debate, and at the end of this debate, if you want to are curious what I believe, don't be afraid to ask me. I'm not going to judge you if you're different than me, but it's just my opinion. And I always preface that with the kids that you need to know how to learn from someone that thinks perhaps differently than you do. That just because we think different doesn't make me less than you. It makes us equals. It's how we learn as Americans. It's how you understand where I'm coming from. It's how I understand where you're coming from. It's how we grow as a country. And that's what makes America the potential to be a great place is we understand where each other stands and why we stand there. And like I talked about last week, for some people that's scary because it could bring change.
Yeah. Yeah, great answer, man. Do you guys have anything to add to that? All right.
Well,
Oh,
oh, sorry.
no, please go ahead.
No, I mean, I distinctly remember in school in the 90s and early 2000s, a civics teacher diminishing the work of one of our greatest presidents, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his work to get the American economy back on track and elevating the American working class. So, like the corporate and political elite lost big during this time and continued to do so until the 1980s. And since the 80s, the the transfer of power from the working class to the elite class has been astronomical.
Mhm.
According to a recent article that was released, was it, by Times Magazine, and they cited the Rand Corporation's study that they did. Approximately 50 to 80 trillion dollars have been redistributed from the bottom 90% Americans to the top 1%. So these staggering figures highlight the significant shift in wealth toward the elite corporate class over the past 3 decades. And it's a vast and expensive propaganda campaign has convinced the majority of Americans to believe that their labor doesn't fuel economic growth, but the billionaires do.
Yep.
The numbers show that this is not the case. Without our labor, billionaires would not exist. And the bootstrap generation still hanging around hard. They tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but again, I said before, you have to have bootstraps to pull yourself up by to begin with. And that means equitable pay, health care, family care, rest and respite, because a happy and healthy society is a productive society. But the American worker is told a lie. Billionaires are not your friend. You are an exploited worker with Stockholm syndrome.
Well said.
And
Absolutely.
those bootstraps that they had back in the day came with if you had a high school diploma, you could be in, you could be married, single income with two kids and survive.
Yeah.
Those
You
are their
could
bootstraps.
buy a house
Ours,
with a raspberry and two
ours
dimes.
is
Yeah.
let's crash the fucking economy,
Yeah.
you know, blow up the housing, create a bubble and blow up the housing bubble, uh,
Again,
again. And we're on that path again. Uh, it's like Jesse said. I mean, the whole bootstraps. You have to have straps to begin with, and yeah, we're out here in sandals. Ain't no boots left.
Well, um, Lou, the next question is for you. Do you think the average voter even realizes how much political messaging is engineered, filtered, and paid for? And does that awareness actually matter at this point?
I would like to think that people can see the manufacturedness of the ads that they're looking at, but the bottom line is all you have to do is look at any AI video on Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, and just go in the comments section
Yeah.
and see how obviously AI it is, and how obviously dumb people are to its reality. Like I saw one, like literally all you had to do was look at the name tape of the uniformed soldier that was up there. And I've never heard of any U.S. Sapri. Couldn't even, it was the SPRY, some other shit.
Those guys dig trenches,
And
right?
wait, they do some fucking thing, but apparently, uh, and they'll sext you for $1 a minute. That's what they'll do. Um, so I see like those types of things, and then you go right in the comments like, God bless our troops. Look at this,
Yeah,
blah blah blah. And it's bullshit. And so again, every time I try to give people credit, they prove me wrong in the comment section of any social media platform. So to answer your question, yeah, no, I don't think they can really see through it. I think some people can, obviously. I think the majority of people see it, but then just turn a blind eye to it because, you know, what they were taught or what they believe, right, will overshadow any truth that comes in front of them, right? One of my science teachers said it best, and you can go ahead and argue he was teaching atheism. But he said to me, or not just to me, but to the class, um, think about it for a second. If I was around when you were born and I was in control of all the information that you ever receive, and I handed you this dictionary and I said, this is the Holy Bible, and everything in it is correct, and everything in it is truth, and that is just the way it is. Nothing else is real. Nothing else. It's all fake. It's a false god. Oh, and by the way, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, you're going to burn in hell and all this other stuff. If I, you know, he was kind of pointing out like the idea of being, indoctrinated early on uh, to certain ideas. And I just think that for a lot of people, whatever they believe is what they're just going to stick with. I know it's sort of a roundabout way of explaining that my thought process on it, but um, yeah, it's hard to break a belief.
it truly is. It's really interesting for me. Zach, you were saying earlier, you try not to be a pessimist. I have fully embraced my cynicism. I live by it, man. I was born in this. I was born in this cynicism. So, what were you going to say, Lou?
Well, I was just gonna say too. It just kind of came to me like if if I know I'm being manipulated, but I
Mm.
believe in the goodness of the person that's manipulating me, I may overlook that, especially if I think that the other side that's trying to talk to me is pure evil.
Yeah,
And that's where what these politicians now have been really good at doing is convincing people that the it's not just that I'm so great, but that other side is really evil, and you
yeah.
should never
It's a
listen to
solid,
them at
solid
all.
point.
I'm
Solid
gonna
point.
bullshit you and I'm gonna take money out your back pocket,
Hmm.
but believe me, because Jesus.
Well, I've had this exact debate. Like I was saying about being a cynic, I absolutely am because I've had this debate with other public affairs Marines and other combat cameramen. And it's just like, as a combat cameraman, it was a roundabout propagandist kind of thing. I mean, I made a lot of leaflets and moto posters and all that crap when I was in the rear, but when I was forward, it wasn't so much. It was all operational. But a lot of public affairs Marines, it's like your entire fucking job to create propaganda. And I've seen too many falling for that same propaganda today, many years later. It's like they have had this complete disconnect, or maybe they're going through the dilemma you just explained, where they're just like, okay, I know I'm being manipulated, but I'm convinced the other side is evil. That actually has been explained to me in so many words during these debates. And it's like, well, eating a shit sandwich or like, drinking a gallon of piss, it's like it's not good either way. I mean, there's always a third option, and while it might not be what most people would say is the most knowledgeable or the most wise option, it's always there. Do you guys have anything else you want to add to this, Zach and Jesse?
As far as the average voter realizing, like I can't put a number on it, but I'm willing to say like it's a lot that they just don't realize it, if not most. Uh, with a caveat, like I think the younger generation in our country is actually savvy on this. They do not get their news from traditional means. Traditional means being the big five corporations. I think they call BS more often than the previous generations, and seek empirical evidence. Overtaking companies heavily invested like by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard at face value.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I just spent an entire year with these guys and their classmates in their 20s, and um, had multiple conversations with them about the state of the union, the state of the world, the different conflicts going on across the world. And I see that they're far less susceptible to engineered political messaging. But if they're not, like they're open-minded enough to allow me and earnest conversation to present another um, source or viewpoint, and then, well, I guess that's about it. Like I
Mm.
mean, back to Lou's point, but simply put, like what is said on TV doesn't match their reality or their lived experience. So I would be skeptical as well.
So, that kind of leads into the next question. Unless Zach, you have something you'd like to add. And this is for you, Jesse. In blue collar spaces and with your younger classmates that you mentioned, where do you see these people getting their political information from, and how reliable do you think those sources are?
Well, from my viewpoint as a mentor, I see that there's a lack of like civic knowledge, but like where they're like my previous point, they do question the narrative a little bit more. They're skeptical because of their lived experience. Um, they're they're getting their information off of apps, and like be it TikTok or Reels and just short form information. But like if it's something suspect, these guys are going out there and they're Googling, and they're not pulling up websites to source this information from Fox or CNN or CBS, because they just inherently do not trust those sources. Uh, and as from my perspective as a mentor, I try to guide them to, legitimate sources. Like, is it can they be trusted? Is this accurate information? Like, does this seem right to you? Well, a lot of times it does, and a lot of times it doesn't. But these guys, they're able to, uh, even with the lack of civic knowledge, they have street smarts. I guess you could say a little bit more than previous generations that have just been propagandized.
Hmm. No, well said. Yeah. And I'll take this opportunity to shout out to Ground News. Hey, we need sponsors. Zach, Lou, what do you guys have to say about this? Where have you seen the same diaspora of people getting their information from, and how valid or credible do you feel it is?
I mean, you hear it all the time, I think too, like, and I've got, friends and, acquaintances, who will right out say, I mean, they're MAGA, but and say, I know Donald Trump's full of shit. I know he is, but at least he's up front about it. But it does, and that doesn't make sense. But if you go back to my original point of, um, if you know you're being lied to, that's one thing. As long as the other side is in your mind, in your reality, worse than what you're buying into.
So
That's
big shout out to Jesse real quick. I love a man that likes French press. Big props there. Big fan. Use French press at least twice a week, dude. But back to the serious point of the question. Same thing with Lou. I have friends, I have family who are MAGA, hard supporters, and they're like, yeah, I know that he's not a good guy. I know that he says things that aren't exactly correct, but they never bother to research or dig into another perspective or watch a different news segment that's not Fox News. I think of a lot of the kids I've taught over the years. Um, for a lot of the civics classes, I used to start my class with a segment called CNN 10. And it was a 10-minute news segment dedicated for students that showed like current American politics and also events happening around the world. And it was actually really great. It was always for like great class conversations of like, okay, like recently, we've been talking about Venezuela. How does the current actions off the coast of Venezuela impact the United States long term? How does that make us look on the world scene? And it's really cool to see teenagers like do some current reflecting on political events. My point though, is that I had parents or grandparents find out that I was showing them CNN. They never bothered to look into what CNN 10 was about. They would email me, call me, or call the principal and be like, "Oh, he's indoctrinating my kid into fascist liberal politics." And I'm not exaggerating fascist liberal politics because I had a parent literally call me, and the first question they said, "Why are you indoctrinating my kid on fascist liberal politics?" And I was like, "Well, I don't think
those
that's
two
right."
things don't go together.
And and so and when I would explain it to them and I'd be like, look, just watch one. And they'd watch it sometimes and they'd be like, oh, that's actually not what I thought it was. Okay, it's fine. And that's my point. Jesse hit the nail on the head with kids getting information from apps. And their parents perhaps aren't getting it from apps, but they're getting it from just one channel because that's what they grew up on. Or their parents grew up a certain way and they don't question anything else. And that's, I think, the thing that I know we've got a great question at the end of what advice to give to people, and I'm not going to open that door, but I'll say this: educate yourself. That's the best thing you can do. And I know that's such a broad statement, but for the love of all things holy, read, watch, even if it's, a YouTube channel like this with our podcast and three more others that are similar, but do your research. That's the best I can tell you to do if you give a damn about this country and its future.
NPR is punk rock, and so is Democracy Now!
Hell
Mhm.
yeah.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question. This one is for you, Zach. How has the influence of money in politics evolved over time? And are we dealing with something new, or is it just an old problem wearing a new suit?
Kevin, this is my favorite question that you've ever asked me. I just want you
Good.
to know that. Um, Man, it's an old problem and it's a very, very new efficient suit that's just been updated and upgraded with all sorts of modifications. We go back to the creation of the country, realistically, and money's always been a factor. It has. The founding fathers knew that. You look at any government realistically that's had success, money has to be a factor somewhere. And so, but I don't think the founding fathers ever really possibly considered the impact of how far it would go. But you think about back in the day of those early 17, early 1800s, voting was tied to property ownership. Well, to own property, you have to have some kind of wealth in this country in the time period. Um, when you think about our early office holders, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, they were landowning elites who could literally vote in this country, landowners. So we got to think that wealth has always been a factor. However, realistically, in my opinion, you rarely see that change happen around 1870 or 1880, well throughout the 1900s. When you give those robber barons in, you get those influential figures into the 1940s, J.D. Rockefeller, for example, and we are looking at 100% corporate pushback, or I wouldn't say corporate pushback, but corporate takeover, especially since the 80s, without a doubt. And that is just something that we can't fight. We're not talking about billions anymore. We're talking with combined total, we're looking at trillions. And that's a new place in American history that we've never seen before. Um, you think about our founding fathers and the value of the wealth that they had, even with inflation calculators, they couldn't fathom. What do you do when you have billions, let alone trillions of dollars that you can have to influence politics, whatever you want to do? And think about how fast it is. You don't just don't have to ride around in a carriage anymore going town to town or taking a train. You can post a GoFundMe account for people to put instant money into your pocket. You can have people PayPal and Venmo you in seconds for how fast you can get money. And that's where the new updated suit comes in. With technology and the brilliance of it, we kind of see how quickly it happens. But you also have to think about the opacity. There's a lot of donors out there that are hidden that we don't know necessarily all the strings that are connected there, and how much money they can bring to the table. You've got to think also considering globalization, how much quickly this money is moving throughout the government. Um, and where the money is coming from, perhaps other nations with inside of our government itself. It's really terrifying to consider how quickly this problem has grown and how it continues to grow. And it doesn't look like it's going to stop by any means. I mean, go on to in any election year. I remember when the election was happening and I was teaching in that fall semester. I had kids go look at the candidates' websites, and one of the first thing on there is a donate now button. What would Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln do in an election eras where people can literally click a button, type in their credit card, and they can donate, up to $1,000 or $2,000 or however much they're willing to give. And imagine what can happen off screen or those private transactions that we can't see. It's to me, it's oddly terrifying and realistically of what people don't understand is how much money is at stake. And that question really leaves us is, what are we dealing with long term? How do we come back from this concept of reform with money and power from a future point? Does it take an economic crash? Does it take our stock market to crash harder than it did in 1929 for us to stray away from perhaps these corporations and these trillionaires that are going to have an impact on our government before it finally goes back to the people? Um, when do the people get a say? Money writes laws, realistically. Money is going to influence movements. Money pushes politicians into power. What about the rest of us? What about this concept, like we've talked about, of the American dream, or of average Americans running the country, making it better for the vast majority of the population instead of such a small, small minority? When do we see that change? Or is this new suit of an age-old problem just going to keep evolving and it's something that we can't kill?
Mm. That was a great answer. As good of a question as I came up with. That was a perfect answer. You guys, what can you add to this?
This is definitely not something new that we're dealing with. It's a
Hmm.
tale as old as time, and from the early period in our history that Zach was talking about to the emergence of the working class post-industrial revolution, like workers have been fighting for their equity from their labor while shareholders are fighting for larger profit margins. And he mentioned kind of bleeding into the 40s, but from the 40s into the late 70s, the American workers dominated the American industry, knew no peak. And it wasn't until laws had kind of been manipulated to subsidize corporations like in the Reagan era, that helped end that trend and really sent American manufacturing overseas to exploit cheap labor in favor of profit. And the coming from uh, a mostly rural state, a state in the South, and one that, for me personally, I've traveled all over this country. Like, there are dead towns littering the American landscape. What used to be economic powerhouse communities like Pittsburgh, Detroit, like they're all kind of gone now.
Hmm.
Damn right. And I think that comes into a lot of ways. In the early eras of our country, mass media doesn't exist. I mean, social media, I guess if you technically want to claim it, as that does exist in the forms of newspapers, because it is social media for the time period. And when the radio comes out, of course, but you don't see anything like today where you can have that impact of mass media on our political institution. And who could prepare for that? Imagine bringing back a founding father from the dead and being like, hey, this is how politics works today with information and influence. You have this device right here that instead of riding on horses and telling your messages to people in towns and towns, you just post out a video and millions of people can watch it in a matter of minutes. How would the founding fathers approach a concept of social media for the time period if they were the ones in charge? Oh, literally, poof! Like they fall over and die immediately. They're just done.
They'd be all like, "Look out, it's George."
Run, it's George.
Uh,
I will say this, Jesse had brought up to like Detroit, and there's an interesting thing happening with Detroit, and it will probably start happening more and more in a lot of different cities where you have these billionaire saviors that come and rescue the poor, dilapidated city that, you know, I don't want to say that they necessarily had a hand in destroying, but yeah, in a way. So Dan Gilbert, the investor and founder of Rocket Mortgage, he has invested a shit ton of money into the city of Detroit for its revitalization. Now, why do you think that is? Right? Is it because he cares about the city, or was it because he wants to own more shit? You know, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of this, right? Uh, you know, you've got a lot of cities that are chomping at the bit to get Amazon facilities so that, people can have, and so, here comes in Jeff Bezos to save again. So there's going to be a lot of this sort of billionaire savior complex
hmm.
that already exists because we elected one of them as a president. So
Well, wait,
there it is.
just to interrupt really quick, I'm sorry. I have to point out that we have a specific, just one particular president of our Senate who who's heavily invested in a company that buys up failed farmland. So by raising all these tariffs and just like screwing over the agricultural workers throughout our country and putting them out, like who's to profit in all of this? I mean, it's a perfect example of exactly what you're talking about right now. So please continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, and this is sort of going to be like a piling on. Like if I introduce a devastating drug into a community, right? Have it completely dilapidated, have it, run itself down, and then I come through and I buy up all the property super cheap. You know, does that
Yeah.
sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
This has all been a work in progress, and I bet you Ronald Reagan would be surprised how quickly it got done. You know,
His
they,
wife
they
wouldn't.
they tout him as one of the best presidents ever. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Look who touts him as that.
Well, all those people that tout him also spit on his grave. I mean, they spit on his memory at every turn. Honestly, I mean, all of the things that he stood for morally, they are against 100%. So it's a really strange mix there. It's a odd platform and it's an odd comparison that they tend to make. Moving on, Lou, while we're on, while we're kind of stuck on you right now. This next question is for you. From a messaging perspective, which is more dangerous, intentional disinformation funded by big donors, or misinformation spreading because people don't have access to good information?
Um, I would say that the funded intentional information is actually or disinformation is more dangerous in the sense that a lot of times misinformation, especially when it's organic, can be easily shut down by organic correct information, right? Like it's a little bit because you might not necessarily have the same pushback as you would by something that's heavily backed by a machine that is going to continuously push that messaging out. And like, no, if you thought this was bullshit, no, here's another reason why it's you're gonna get more people that know what the fuck they're doing, right? Like you have legitimate communications professionals who are fucking lying to you. And they're going to continue to fucking lie to you and make it sound like it's true. And they're just going to continuously push that shit. Now, with the organic sort of misinformation, we're talking the Earth is flat type shit. Um, I know there's still people that believe some of that shit. But I think those types of, and not necessarily that. I'm just sort of using that as an example, but those types of things that are kind of like laughable um, can be broken down pretty quickly,
Hmm.
and really again by another organic pushback the other way. But when you're pushing back against a big organization that's well funded, um, that has specific and measured goals for the bullshit that they're feeding you, that's a lot more dangerous. Organic bullshit that comes up from your Uncle Bubba, you know, just making some shit up one night, one day. It might have a little traction and it might last a little bit, but Uncle Bubba's not sitting there thinking left and right about how to combat any sort of opposition to that thought process. Whereas the big media machine is, they've already they've got answers for every fucking rebuttal that you might have.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Um, I think that intentional disinformation is more dangerous because, the
Mhm.
malice in which it's inherently linked to the information being spread. People spreading organic misinformation is unavoidable, but it's not intentional. We're all human beings, and we believe what we believe until new evidence is presented to counter that perspective being shared. Intentional disinformation is attached to an agenda being disseminated intentionally for the sole purpose of whatever nefarious deeds are being done behind the scenes for whatever purpose. And the former is just human nature, which, like Lou said, it can be corrected.
Absolutely. I think yeah, I mean that disinformation is absolutely done with malice, and it's always to push a specific narrative. And it always starts out with telling the people that they are brave and bold and smart by listening to said and subscribing to said disinformation. Whereas misinformation is like Lou said, Uncle Bubba talking about, oh, Bill Clinton's a Chinese plant and stuff. I mean, like there's a lot of stuff I've heard over the Thanksgiving dinner.
George Soros
Yeah.
that funded.
Yeah, absolutely. Lou, do you have anything you want to throw in before we I'm sorry, Zach, do you have anything you want to throw in before we move on to the next question? All right.
Brilliant.
So this next one is for you, Jesse. It's having worked in Marine Corps public affairs, how different is messaging inside institutions compared to how issues are discussed within the shop floor, within the farm, within the student body that you have gone to school with?
Oh man, um, it's the politics. Like particularly my time in the Marine Corps. I did 12 years, 8 months. The politics is the main difference. You didn't really get much of an opportunity to question the narrative because of the politics. And when you reach the staff and CO level and the officer level, and public affairs, like you're dealing with some pretty serious issues. And even if the command is wrong and you say this is how we should move forward with the messaging on this, and they tell you to pound sand, I saw it blow up in their face a lot. Whereas my experience on the civilian side, like I've had leaders over me and then coworkers and classmates that they seem to be um, more grounded in the reality of where they're at in society and have less of a more apolitical attitude toward um, all of it. And of course, there are people that tie their identities up into it and they get spun up and think that, you're being offensive by saying one thing about one party or the other. But for the most part, I've seen that if you just show them facts, like, hey, like this is what's actually going on in Israel and Palestine, like this is actually what's going on in Sudan. I know that you quoted this article from Fox News, but like here's another viable, like trusted source of the reality on the ground, or so on and so forth. They're more receptive. That was not my experience in the military there, 100%.
Well put. I'll go ahead and pass this torch to Lou. Like, what do you have? What's your opinion on this? Because I know that you have one.
Um, it's that's a tough one. Like,
Yeah.
I would, all right, I'm sorry, buddy.
No, take your time, man. No rush at all. Number 10. Zach's up there getting down.
My ADHD brain's kicking in. I hear beats in my head.
I was diagnosed too, but I had to lie to the recruiters.
I don't know what you're talking about, Kevin.
Huh?
I said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Good. My recruiter didn't either.
Okay, yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know why I'm passing this off to you.
yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about Marine Corps messaging is the Marine Corps, the Marine Corps way is going to be the Marine Corps way, right? The whatever
Mhm.
message they want is going to be what gets out there. There are systems put in place, where if I'm writing a story, I mean, I'll give an example. I wrote a story about Marine sniper who, for that particular deployment, had the longest I in terms of distance um, confirmed kill shot, and I wrote the story on it. That wasn't necessarily the message that the Marine Corps wanted at the time, right? We're not over there doing things like that. It's happening. And surprisingly, they let the story kind of push through, but they did not elevate it to certain statuses like I've seen other stories elevated at the time, right? Like it's going to be more of your hearts and minds stories, like handing out soccer balls and things like that. Whereas maybe in other times during the war, that would have been front page, everything. Because I mean, I had photos of basically of the of the scope, like with in the story. Like he took a picture of what he was looking at. I mean, it was pretty effective and pretty powerful. But yeah, I mean, you know, that's what I would say. Sort of is,
Hmm.
the difference between Marine Corps public affairs and maybe your average like sort of everyday sort of organization. There's still control in there, obviously, right? Like you're still going to have to push your stuff through a chain of command in a sense. Um, but it's not going to be as sort of micromanaged in that way, unless, of course, that particular organization has adopted a lot of the same military-esque ways about doing things, which is becoming more and more popular.
It is. It absolutely is. I have a whole episode I've written about that actually in particular that we're gonna have to hit on next month.
Folks, for this holiday party, we're gonna have to get boots on the ground.
Yeah. I'm just gonna push on. Zach, do you think the founders ever imagined a democracy where money plays such a dominant role in shaping outcomes? I know you kind of hinted on this a few minutes ago. I'd like to just ask it more directly.
So, in my opinion, and just based on my research and findings, the founding fathers definitely thought that money would matter, but I don't believe they ever thought how it would matter in our modern era, and especially how it would come into play this way. Um, you think about the fact that wealth and power are connected inevitably. It has to be. It's always been that way. How else do you have power without wealth? How do you have wealth without power? And so when it comes into, even early office holding, that's tied to wealth, with property in the time period. Wealth, at least from those early days, its concept that wealth at least has independence, because it's independent from corporation, perhaps. Education was a virtue. And we had these incredibly high stakes put into this. But over time, we see a lot of change come into play there. And to me, at least, it makes me pretty sad how we've kind of fallen from our understanding, at least in my concept there, is that we see a change of pace when it comes to campaign spending. You don't see that with the founders. And perhaps, and this goes back to Washington, George W., the GOAT, even warned us of political institutions, that political institutions would act as these political machines, eventually subverting power from the people, where the American people would no longer have a voice and no longer have a say. And institutions would be ran by the wealthy, would be ran by the elite that do not share the same views as what is best for this country and this concept of democracy that they were attempting to create in the late 1780s and the 1790s. Um, and you bring in that factor. How would our founding fathers respond to some of the dog and pony show they see today of these political campaigns, of these debates, of the mockery and to an extent of American politics that we see? But when you factor in, the original concept of the founders, their initial concept is too much democracy, is a little more fearful than too much wealth. They built a government that was around elites assuming the responsibility, that eventually future leaders would share these values, and this concept of civic virtue would have a restrained self-interest where it really goes back to, hopefully, at least for what the founders thought, people being educated about the elites running in their country, voting for the right elites that are running for those elections there. So when we boil down to it, did the founders anticipate what we have today? God, no. I don't know if anybody could realistically imagine the republic that we have created today. Um, and when you think about it, look directly at the Federalist Papers that are written. Federalist 10 and Federalist 51 really tie into this concept of elitism. I get to teach those in AP Government, or I used to. Great documents to read if you guys have never read the Federalist Papers. And then I also counter that with Brutus. Brutus is phenomenal to get into. That would be a fun episode podcast to dive into us there. But our modern concept of democracy is realistically just abstract financial power that we see today, especially building up on that, as Jesse has so eloquently pointed out in this episode, he's killed it, of the 80s, that huge change where we just see this gap growing and growing and growing. Um, you know, talk to a founding father, bring them back to life, ask them if they can even fathom what $1 trillion looks like compared to what they were experiencing in the 1780s and 90s, compared to where we are now. But we also have, um, institutionalized self-interest that's a huge factor to play today instead of this concept of the 1780s and 90s of creating a nation where they're trying to pave a way for all Americans. I would say all, let me rephrase that, puppy breaks. They pave in a country for what they feel is for the wealthy at the time, instead of what we see with the self-interest today and how we are just being so torn apart by the political institutions that Washington literally warned us against. I always tell my kids to really look at Washington's farewell address there and what he warns against. The two big factors there, foreign affairs, political parties. What would have happened had somebody bothered to pay an ounce of attention of like, this guy's maybe got a point of political parties. Is it the two-party system that is dropping the ball on us, or is it multi-party system the answer there, where we try to give third parties the voice of reason? But we also know how that would realistically work when it comes to money and power. And I really think, boiling down to it when we get to the end, where the founding fathers started a concept in this noble idea of the American dream of people having a say. I think that people have definitely tried to have a say without a doubt in American history. You've got all sorts of movements that have tried to bring rights, tried to bring equality to an extent. But I think there's just in so many ways too much corruptness, too much money that keeps it from achieving the goals that we could have as this great country that we've been taught that we could be, simply because who is not corrupted to money? I know Kevin and Lou and I have talked about that when it was brought up of just salaries for what ICE gets paid, and like how people have had to factor that in for the six-figure salaries that come into play there. That realistically, when you put working Americans at the end of the day and it comes to perhaps money, a lot of us would give into it because it's something we've never had. And I think that that's where this country is now. Is that even with the notions of the founders of what they saw versus where we are now, money's always going to be a factor, always has been, always will be. Even in the future, if for some reason the Democratic and Republican parties fall, and third parties come into play. What's to stop the corporates that are still existing? What's to stop the elites that then exist then from influencing the third parties and repeating the same sister over and over again under a different guise, under a different name?
I was writing this down while you were talking, and it's true. That was a really profound answer, and I appreciate it. But the definition of wealth and the elite has changed dramatically. And what you were saying about a founding father coming back, they wouldn't even recognize it. What they saw as wealth and what they saw as the elite are not what it is today. It's a completely different animal, and it's scary. And it would become a different animal just to creep into those third parties, as you were saying. Jesse, as a historian, because I'm going to lean on your historical abilities here as well. What would you have to say about this?
As a majority, it was the intent from the beginning. Like during the founding of our republic, like many states, probably all of them, like Zach mentioned earlier, required land ownership as a stipulation for a vote, typically reserved for exclusively for white men. Granted, over time, many interpretations of the Constitution later, these stipulations are gradually lifted to allow non-landowning whites to vote, which changed the dynamic, but still not significantly because you really had to have money to have influence. Even through the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement, more and more disenfranchised groups of Americans were justly afforded this right through appropriate interpretations of the Constitution. But I don't think that I think that the founding fathers planned for it, but I don't think they imagined the type of society we live in now. But they were a product of their time. But money is definitely a factor.
Hmm, absolutely. Lou, do you have anything to add? All right, we're going to move on to the next question then. Thank you guys for your answers. I really appreciate that. This next question is for you, Lou. In your experience, do political talking points tend to assume the public is well informed or uninformed and easily influenced?
Well, I'll go ahead and start this answer by just saying the reason I didn't have a response for that last one is because Jesse and Zach just fucking nailed it,
Yeah,
knocked it out of the park.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and there's nothing that I could add to it. I would seem like uninformed if I had tried to add anything. Um, so I want to make this very fucking clear to everybody that's listening to this. There are no more assumptions when it comes to advertising, political advertising, or anything of the sort for any well organized, well funded machine. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is they know if you are well informed, uninformed. They have so many data points on each of us that they can break it down into target. When I talk about targeted marketing, I don't mean white males from age, 30 to 35 that are single and have a dog, you know? I mean literally pinpointed to you, Zach, Jesse, Kevin, Lou. They can pinpoint it to us as individuals, down to that point, that pinpoint. They know who the fuck they're messaging to, and they will cater those messages accordingly.
Via the algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that the algorithms is like something that, is thrown out a lot. I mean, it's no accidents. It's fucking expensive. They fucking pay the money to get those data points. That's why Facebook is such a heavy influencer in politics, is because they have all our data points. They know everything we've been posting for fucking 15 goddamn years, 20 years at this point, actually, or 22 years. Fuck. They know everything about you. They know what you like, what you don't like. They know what you liked 10 years ago versus what you don't like now. There are data points on all of us, and it shows us throughout the course of our internet userness, right? Like, so, like, er, from the moment, the very first time you logged on to the internet to now, they have all those data points for the most part. And they know what makes you tick. They know what gets you going. And they're going to use it. And I need everyone, like seriously, I'm saying this wholeheartedly. Understand that that's what the fuck, not just what they can do, that's what they are doing. You think you think it's just that they're listening in on you, that you were talking about, say prostate cancer or something, and all of a sudden you get like, hey, you should go, to this hospital, this particular healthcare provider to get checked up for your, make them, you know, touch your nuts and make sure everything's good to go. No, it's because you probably searched it at one point recently. You probably Googled it also recently. Not to say that they're not also listening to you, but yeah, they have every data point that there is. So, as far as this question goes, um, they don't assume anything.
Hmm.
They know what the fuck they're doing. So, what you should assume is that what you are receiving is targeted toward you. And what you need to think about is why.
Absolutely. Zach, Jesse.
I personally don't think that they care whether or not their constituency is informed. The most uninformed voters that I've seen are the ones that rely on corporate media to stay informed. As a former PAO, I personally always ask the questions: why? Where did you cite this information? Are they trusted? Is this accurate? And more often than not, it's sensational nonsense manufactured to divide for whatever purposes. Navy veteran and country music artist and activist Sturgill Simpson said, "If there is any doubt, there is no doubt. The gut don't ever lie." And plainly put, if it smells like bullshit, you probably stepped on it after your politician dropped his talking point.
Hmm. That's good. Yeah, I just my 2 cents on this question, I'll just say a quote. I love the uneducated. That's it. That's all I have to say on it. With that, this is actually going to be a two-part episode. I'd like to go ahead and wrap this episode up. Thank you guys. I really appreciate all of your answers to these questions so far. If if we can if we can ask one more question, just kind of a discussion question, we can talk about it for a minute or two. I would love that. Basically, if you could give one piece of advice, each of you, if you could give one piece of advice to people trying to navigate today's political noise, what would it be? Now let's start with Zach.
Man, I mean, it's a phenomenal question, realistically. Um, my best answer, or best piece of advice would be for one, for people to listen with open ears, regardless of who the politician is, regardless of what party it is. But listen, and then honestly, do your research. I know that that sounds like a hard task when you hear the word research, but if you care about the future of this nation, if you care about the well-being of yourself when it comes to perhaps the economy, when it comes to the well-being of your fellow Americans, when it comes to our rights and liberties, do your deep dives into where these people actually stand. Just because I really like candidate A because they fit my narrative, are they actually telling the truth? Do they actually give a fuck about who I am as an American citizen? And I think that's what we really have to reflect on. And I think that's the best advice for people. Do your research. If we're going to go off of the Christian narrative, um, to an extent, that means taking care of your neighbors, putting your friends, your loved ones, your neighbors before yourself. And that also means putting that with your politicians. Look at these politicians that are going to take care of all of us, not perhaps just our own interests, but all of us as people, bringing us together to make our lives better as American citizens, and as American people for what we consider to be the greatest country in the world. Kevin, you're muted. You're muted. Hands up. You're muted.
Jesse, Jesse, go right on ahead. I'm gonna stop muting myself because this is a problem I've always had.
Oh, it's fine. Um, well, if I had one piece of advice for the folks out there in this like chaotic political landscape, like you have to understand that you've been programmed and propagandized from both sides. Like strip away all your preconceived notions and just listen to people. Listen to understand and empathize. Don't listen to respond. Uh, I think that we're a far divided country because of today's sensational media drowned world, and folks believe what they're told vice questioning the narrative, which typically comes with an agenda and in a with that you have to be willing to cross party lines and have uncomfortable conversations. But if you listen and you begin to understand where perceived, and that's the word, perceived opposition is coming from, then you start to see them as they are. They're human beings. All humans have the same basic needs, family dynamics, struggles, and concerns. Empathy will get you much further in a conversation toward a solution than hatred ever will.
Yeah. Amen. Lou,
Yeah, to end with me. You should have ended with Jesse. That was awesome.
that was awesome. Yeah, how do we follow that? I'm nervous too. I got to follow all three of you.
Uh, I mean, my advice is open your fucking eyes. See what's happening in front of you. Um, and don't look through the same lens when you do open those eyes. Try. Try empathy for just a fucking minute. Just just test it out. Put yourself in someone else's shoes just once. Talk to that person that you are putting yourself in their shoes. See what their experiences are. Have open dialogue. Have a conversation with somebody that doesn't agree with you politically or religiously or something. Learn about your fellow Americans. Somebody's a different religion than you. Hey, tell me a little bit about your religion. Somebody's a different political point of view. How'd you come to that conclusion there? And then listen. And as you know, I think both Zach and Jesse, the listen part was included in that. It's like, you know, don't just wait as Jesse was talking about, don't just wait to talk, right? Actively listen. Have something ready to go, of course, but listen to what's going on. Listen to what the person that you're talking to is saying, and try to put yourself in their shoes. Have that sort of empathy, And I think when you come to a conversation from the point of cooperation as opposed to uh, coming to a conversation of adversarial or like opposition. If you come to it with sort of a cooperation thing, we're going to listen to each other. We're going to talk. We're going to come to, even if we don't come to an agreement, we're going to come to at least some sort of standpoint where I heard you, you heard me, we're good to go. Let's go from there. So that's my overall advice. Wake the fuck up.
Yeah, those are great answers. For me personally, I would say slow down and just ask who benefits from it. When you hear a political message, like a headline or a viral clip, you got to pause and ask who gains power, money, or influence if you believe it or you repeat it. Most political noise is designed to rush us into a reaction before we've had time to think. And that clarity, it always comes from patience, context, and a willingness to sit with complexity instead of chasing certainty. And that's all I'll have. I hate that I had to follow you guys because those were all amazing answers.
Ooh.
But oh, we have something to say?
Oh, I'm gonna flip the script on you. I'm gonna hit
Okay.
you with the unprepared, unserious question that I thought of in this podcast. And Kevin, I'm gonna allow you to go first for once because you need this. You put in all the time. You do these questions. You need to go first. So, Kevin, and this is gonna go to Jesse, then Lou, then me. All right, and this can be as unserious as you guys want. If you could bring back one founding father to spend a day with, or even a week with, okay, who would you bring back? Kevin.
Oh my God. I'm gonna get myself trouble for saying this, but probably Jefferson. I know he was like this horrible rapist, but all of his ideals, like they appealed to me, more so than a lot of the other founding fathers. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to, as I said, I really don't want to get myself in trouble here. I know the guy was kind of a bastard, and like there's a significant population of African Americans who are related to him. But yeah, it would have to be Jefferson, and I think that was funny enough. Go on ahead, guys.
Jesse.
You should bring him back and show him that and be like, hey, you got some reparations, buddy.
Yeah, for real, man.
Yeah, bud. Let me tell you what. Um, I think that if I were able to bring back one of the founding fathers, my choice would probably be John Adams. Um, from everything that I've read and my understanding of the man, he was in in a time of turmoil and questionable things happening around him. Hello, Ben Franklin. Like he stood his ground as a moral man, and that's how he governed. He governed with his moral compass and not uh, how he could use his political power to be affluent or money or anything of the sort. Um, and I see, uh, you know, ad, uh, it's admirable. I see admiration in that.
All right, Lugal, what you got?
Lugal just Googled. No, I would probably say, and this is I'm just gonna keep this short and sweet. Alexander Hamilton, and I would love to fucking just go and watch Hamilton with him to see his reaction to it. That's
That's awesome. You
Yeah.
know what I love about this? All four of us have different answers. I'm gonna have to go Ben Franklin. I would love to bring back Ben Franklin, teach him how to use social media for a day, give him Twitter, give him Reddit, and let him just do whatever he wants to do and see where the path takes us.
I'm
Oh yeah.
actually surprised none of us said Madison because, regarding this topic specifically, I think he had the most to offer, but all of us have our selfish reasons, especially me, I think. Well, I would say Franklin on Reddit. That's pretty solid. We
That's
would
pretty
get
hope.
some we would get some laughs out of that. Absolutely, man. And I don't think Hamilton would like that I don't think he would like Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. It was good, but I have a feeling he wouldn't dig it like we did. What do you all right, with that, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up part one. Thank you guys very much, and thank you all for watching, and I really appreciate it. And Jesse, thank you again for being our guest for this episode and the next episode that will be airing, part two of this, which we are
Any-
going to be recording right now. But that explains why we're all wearing the same clothes in part two. We're not that dirty.
but it's my pleasure, though. Thank you.
Awesome. And cut.